Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us at this edition of ThinkShop with Bull. My name is Alex Greifeld, and I am the author of No Best Practices, which is a blog and a newsletter about helping marketers think more like operators and cutting through some of the nonsense that's out there in the e-commerce landscape. And in addition to that, I have a day job. I work at Tapestry, which is the parent company of Coach Kate Spade and Stuart Weitzman. And I'll be your moderator for this panel today. We have a really interesting and potentially controversial topic, which is budget planning season. And I know what you're all thinking, we're basically in the middle of Q4, month out from holiday. Everyone is super swamped, and you get that email or that phone call from finance, and it's like, surprise, now it's time to start thinking about next year. So we want to talk today about how to make that process more effective and less painless. And we have three amazing panelists to help shed some light on that discussion. They're coming from a mix of the brand and the agency world. So I'm going to hand it over first to Ingrid to introduce herself, and then we'll let Ian and Phillip introduce themselves as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Ingrid Millman-Cordy, and I am the head of digital marketing and e-commerce for Noon Hydration. I am also launching a podcast called Infinite Shelf. It will launch in early November, so please look out for that. We'll hopefully send you an email, let you know. And basically, I have been in the e-commerce and digital marketing space for over a decade. I have worked for very large companies like the Estee Lauder companies, and also in smaller companies like I am right now at Noon Hydration. But ultimately, what I do is I advocate for the best consumer experience within a brand through a digital lens. But now, as I've risen in my career, I'm part of the leadership team. And so I think about things much more holistically and thinking about total sales, not just online sales, and the brand development as a whole, not just digital marketing. So it's been a really interesting and exciting thing to add, and has definitely broadened my expansion of the way that I think about budgets and priorities. Phillip?
Hey, so yeah, Phillip Jackson, and I wear a number of hats despite having hair that it's obvious that I care about. So on the one side of the house, I've spent the last almost 9 years in the agency and services side, most recently serving as Chief Commerce Officer at Right Point Commerce. Right Point is a digital experience consultancy out of Chicago, and I, help brands that are ones that you know and love, and ones that you probably frequent and have in your cupboard, to think about how they're engaging in e-commerce and thinking about how they're building the next generation of e-commerce or reinvesting in digital commerce in their business. And that is all informed by the first half of my career, which is now feels like many moons ago. But for 10 years, I helped build engineering teams for direct-to-consumer brands in the early aughts, back when we had to actually build e-commerce from scratch, and you couldn't just launch a Shopify store. I know. Yada yada. Back in my day, uphill both ways. But the perspective that we bring through there, I think, is going to help us to inform this conversation, because we have the same kind of challenges around budget season that everybody else here does. One of the biggest challenges being, just our product and our margins are entirely dependent upon people's time, and that has its own challenges in helping to achieve growth. And we are at the service of our customers, who are also trying to achieve growth at the same time. And so our fates are intrinsically entwined in budget season. And by the way, we're the ones who are carrying the pager 24/7, through the holidays, just as you are, and many times on the engineering side. And so we have a very interesting perspective. The other hat I wear is I operate a podcast called Future Commerce, and these days it's become a full-fledged media company, and we are publishing content 4 or 5 days a week, depending on which week it is. And you can like and subscribe and all that. Smash the like button at futurecommerce.fm.
Hey, my name is Ian Wesley. I am Phil Jackson's #1 fan, and he's spitting straight fire there with his Shopify take. So I am senior director of retail advocacy at Bolt, and so I work with our merchants to help them put their best foot forward, tell their stories, tell their success stories, help them best I can, and then also as the brand ambassador for Bolt, and also to kind of evangelize on behalf of the merchant internally with Bolt and our checkout operating system, making sure we're talking to our merchants in plain English and in ways that operators can understand. And my background is I was on the e-tail side for 6-7 years with Industry West, where I helped grow their D2C channels exponentially over that 6-7 year period. Prior to that, I was in lead gen demand gen on the higher ed side for Savannah College of Art and Design, where I led both their front end, back end development teams, social media, content marketing, and SEM, SEO, email marketing, all with the goal of getting high school students to raise their hand and say, I want to spend a lot on college. Yeah, that's where I am, and looking forward to chiming in where I can here with this amazing panel.
All right, awesome. And thanks to all three of you for your time today. I think let's take it from 0 to 100 about as fast as possible and make this topic real for everyone. I would love if each of you could share one of your best or your worst experiences with end of year planning, or both. And just a note, you don't have to be super specific. You can just say like, oh, in a past role, such and such happened. But we love to hear your highs or your lows. Does anyone feel compelled to answer that first?
I can kick it off. So I had an experience at a company that shall remain nameless, and the entire first half we were working toward the second half where we would blow out our awareness toward a totally new consumer. And everything that we did in terms of content planning, media planning, budgeting, everything was in service to this great expansion of our consumer. And it was definitely a risk. It was more of a departure from the tried and true traditional people that would, frequent this brand. And it was just really, really exciting. It got the entire company really excited. And we were in this fantastic partnership with an agency. Lo and behold, the month, maybe a month is probably generous, a few weeks before we were set to launch, the named founder of this company got cold feet, wet and cold feet, I think.
Wow.
And decided to scrap the entire thing. The campaign, the launch, the whole thing, every piece of it. And frankly, it was a privately held company still. And this person just had the ability to just do that and said, hey, I have this brilliant idea. I know you guys have been working for months and months and months. What if we just sell one extra of this item to our existing consumer? Then we'll just double. And it was just as simple as that. And so frankly, we all had to just swallow our pride and do that. And that was, I would say, the worst experience, but it also sort of led me to make some decisions about my career thereafter. So we made the best of it, and I hopefully will not be in that position again. But yeah, that was a wild, wild ride.
Sounds like the underpant gnomes from South Park. Just like underpants, profit.
Yeah.
It also reminds me of the episode of The Office where Andy has to buy paper to make goal. And we've none of us have ever been encouraged to, with a friends and family sale, to help us kind of close the gap on a plan. That's never happened, I'm sure.
Infinite paper in a paperless world. My story is, so this was actually a friend of mine who came scrambling to me on maybe a week before Black Friday and was like, hey, do you know any good SEM people? because we have to have them take a look at our Google campaign. We're
Oh
not really doing a
no.
lot of conversions, and I mean, so I mean, and I think that's like not it's not as lengthy a story, but I mean, I really think it speaks to like the lack of general planning around the end of the year in Q4. And I know like it really is all the way from Phil, I'm sure you know, like the dev side where it's like October 15th. It's like, oh, what can we implement before Black Friday? And then you're like, oh, there's a code freeze. And they're like, what do you mean there's a code freeze? And blah, blah, blah. But I mean, you know, from all facets of just like a lack of planning where people think it's really not underpants profit, right? It's like it takes a lot longer than that. Where a week out, you can't say, hey, can we burn down and rebuild our SEM?
I mean, all of the above, I think are sort of worst case scenarios. My my challenge in best and worst experiences has always been in both the relationship with a client, right, who is a direct to consumer or branded manufacturer, some sort of e-commerce operation that are trying their best to meet some goal that was probably imposed upon them. And we are trying our best to meet a goal, a margin and a revenue growth goal as a services agency that was imposed upon us too. And what I think that we all benefit from is having a better conversation. And the best conversations, to sort of take the positive approach here, is best conversations is when you can try to transition your relationship with the customer so that it's not so transactional. And having a transactional relationship with a customer means when they fail, you fail. And when that happens, especially let's say just in the developer sense, if we're not seen as a strategic partner, every campaign could be your last. Like anything that you're doing is sort of the current state of affairs. It's the temperature read on the nature of the relationship. If a project is running over budget, if a project isn't launching on time, well, that is probably, if you're not close enough to why the project existed in the first place, or why we're all in this challenge together, why we're all building together, if you weren't part of the planning, then you have very little say in how you can try to steer back to get on course. Really, the only thing you have to control is just making sure that you execute perfectly every time. And honestly, executing perfectly every time is not how e-commerce or retail works. That's just, it doesn't work that way, because people don't just show up. Traffic just doesn't appear out of nowhere. We have to do things to make this all happen, and it takes a long time to see the effects of the work that we put in, whether that's code or whether it's marketing investment. And so the best experiences is when you have a relationship with a customer, or a relationship across the aisle in a different department, say finance, where you have the ability to ask why and not be challenged. And if you can have the relationship with your customer to ask, why are we doing this, so that you can seek out a better way, or so that you can have a better shot at the next time we're all doing planning, that we can take a step back and say, what are all the things we want to do, right? Instead of this one thing, what's all this, what's the totality of the things that we're going to do together? Because they are all interdependent, right? That's how compound annual growth works. And they're all interdependent. The gains that we make in Q1 are compound. And if you make small gains in Q1, they compound to lead to large gains in Q4. And likewise, if you have no growth in Q1 and Q2, good luck. And so that's where we have this the best relationships, the best outcomes. And I can't think of a specific example, but the best outcomes is when we are a trusted strategic partner and not a transactional partner. I don't know if that takes us where we want to go there, Alex, but that's just the darn truth.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great segue. And I think what's so interesting about all three of your experiences is that there is no common thread. It's like a bump in the road could come from anywhere potentially, because the planning process is so cross-functional and so holistic. And we know that it kind of takes a village to build out one of these plans. So to switch gears a little bit, I would love to hear more about, for each of you, who are some of the key partners that you worked with in your planning process, and what are some things that you did to strengthen those relationships, or potentially manage the relationship when that was necessary? Does anyone want to kick us off with that one? Otherwise, I can cold call on one of
you. Yeah, I mean, I'll go first. I mean, I think for me, our biggest strategic partners were on the e-commerce side were our SIs, our systems integrators, partners on the dev side, and then the digital media team that did our buy. And I think, I mean, for me, one of the biggest tips or tricks I think is really like what, as Phil had mentioned, the planning aspect, right? Like let's set out the year and see what's the priority stack of everything we're trying to achieve, and how do we set budget and goals to try and achieve as much of that as possible. And then when something comes up Q3, well, what's not going to happen Q4 to allow that to happen in Q3? And then also transparency, right? Like I think a lot of companies are on the merchant side, a lot of companies are a little worried about giving too much information. But I think if you find the right partner, the more insights you can give into your data in terms of sales, both offline, online, that are occurring, on what channels those sales are coming from, the better will allow a lot of your partners to optimize towards that sale. They want to see as much success as you do, if it's a true partnership, like Phil said, and not just a one-off kind of campaign.
Have you ever had to push for more data than that you were initially not being given? Do you have any tips for that, like kind of how to push back gently to get what you need?
I mean, on the merchant side, or?
I mean, I guess more on the partner side, but I think it could be useful advice for merchants too, because sometimes departments can be pretty siloed with their data.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I think I've always felt like whether working with any of the partners we did, we were always privy to as much data as we had asked for as a merchant. I think that was part of finding good partners. So that wasn't always the case. I mean, I think that's why we had to cycle through some partners at points. But yeah, I mean, I think speed to data and ability and transparency in that data was always critical. And as like you guys can attest, I mean, as much as you try to plan what happens on a Monday is going to influence what happens on a Tuesday, or what you want to do on Tuesday. So in terms of sales, so seeing, okay, well, just being able to ask, okay, well, what did we do for the past 5 Mondays, and what was different yesterday that things were down, et cetera, and just having that kick back to you relatively quickly. So I've never really had that issue, but I think I know I've been lucky enough to pick good partners.
All right. Ingrid, I saw you came off mute.
Yeah, picking good partners is critical. And one of the best analogies that I've been able to come up with in trying to illustrate what this feels like, probably from both sides, because I've been on both sides, is, we're hiring people, agencies in particular, to help us pack, right? They're this agency that is just the most organized packing agency in the world. And we tell them, we invite them to our homes and we say, here's the piece of luggage, and I need you to pack me for this trip that I'm going on. And here's some money that, you will need to help me pack. And clearly there's not enough information. We're like, right, we are good at packing and that's what we do. And you told us, okay, so now you need us to pack. So, but actually let's figure out, where are you going? Is it a warm location? Is it a cold location? Great. So now the marketing team can probably help me with determining where I'm going and at least like the climate of where I'm going and the people that I'm going to be around. But then you need to understand, like, what are the things you're going to be doing there, right? So now you're going to a warm climate and you need to bring warm, like, clothes for warm weather. But then, oh, there's a wedding that we're going to. Okay, well, that changes things. And so the sales team is also responsible for letting you know, okay, well, we're going to expand distribution and we're going to have a product launch. And so there are just like the more and more layers that you peel back of this trip that you've hired someone to help you pack for, the better the outcome is going to be of the packing, right? And I think it's incredibly oversimplified, but I do think it's illustrative of the larger issue that agencies and partners are given a very, very specific lens and a ask that the more information you give them, the better they're going to be able to deliver. And it sounds like the most simple piece of advice, but I can't even count on both hands and feet how many times I have been in a situation on both sides that I've had to like peel back this information. And it's never really clear. It doesn't always mean that people are holding back intentionally information because they don't want people to know, but it's just the connection between understanding how far that context can actually take you in your partnership to get you the outcomes that you want that matters the most. And just going full circle, I think that's where it comes into like planning and budgeting. I really, really do, to Ian's point, I select excellent brand partners and agencies, and then I let them in as though they're full-time employees and they work fully on my team. And I'm incredibly transparent about how much we have to spend, what our goals are, and what we're trying to achieve, even in funding that they're not going to get, like things that are outside of their scope, just again, to help them understand where I'm going on this trip so that they can help me pack my bag.
I absolutely love that metaphor.
Me too. I want to know where we're going.
Hawaii. Let's go to Hawaii.
Let's go.
Phil,
I'll
do you have anything
chime
to
in.
add?
No, I never. I'm rarely caught off guard with something with having nothing to say. I find it fascinating that when I ask, my 45 clients who I'm engaged in strategic, planning with, I help to conduct a QBR for, 45 different clients in as part of my full-time job. That's what I do. And so we're tracking to goal every quarter, which means we're sitting down once a year and we're trying to establish what we should be checking in on every quarter. I find it fascinating that when I ask what we could be doing a better job with, nearly unanimously, all of my clients say, we would love more insight into what other brands are doing, because you see a plurality of brands. I see Ian flashing a smile there. You see all of these brands that are spending money in certain places. You see them all doing, certain things. They're implementing certain technologies. You kind of know where they're all heading. I just wish that you would some of that insight would be so valuable to us. But it's interesting because conversely, when I tell them that 44 of the other brands have nowhere near the growth goals that you've outlined to me, you don't want to take that advice, because the everybody wants the one new quick trick. Everyone wants something new that they can put it, that they can set out to CapEx. Very few people want to hear that some of the things that they're not being set up for success. Right? Very few people want to hear that others see roadblocks ahead, that others are challenged with channel competition, right? And that there's channel conflict. Amazon's winning out. They're driving a ton of traffic to the site. Site's not converting like it used to. Why? Well, it's not because you haven't put the right conversion rate optimization software on your stack. It's because your Amazon business is up 3x over the last 18 months. And so your customer is winning. Your channel goal is set incorrectly, or you've inappropriately resourced one of your teams, or you haven't set up a collaborative behavior amongst your sides of the business, right? And these are all things that are outside of my purview, but I have insight into by looking at the dozens of other customers that I have. This is the kind of feedback that I would like to be able to give to a customer. And I'm going to send them all this video, by the way. And then I'll make this a TikTok too, so that it freakishly shows up in their For You page. But this is the kind of thing. It's like I think that there's this reductive behavior because of the ease of e-commerce to be able to implement things in the way that we spend money that we're budgeted. If I have to if I don't have to go and ask for money and I can just spend money of my own accord and I can stay in my lane, it's the path of least resistance. And if I can reach my goals by doing that, even better. And so the one quick trick, the one weird thing, the new plugin, the Shopify plugin, the new partner, maybe the one-click checkout, God bless you, Ian, like whatever it happens to be, is the thing that we tend to get myopic and focused on in e-commerce, and not necessarily fundamentals and looking at the other parts of the business. There's only a few levers you can pull, right? We got to send more traffic to the site, convert it at a higher rate, get them to purchase more while they're there, and then bring them back again to do it again. And if we can't do that, then we really don't have an efficient channel. And I don't think over time, one last thing about that, the optimization too, over time, is also deprecating parts of the things that aren't working. And that's not a conversation that we have often enough, right? Where are you spending money that's budgeted right now that you should be spending at all? Or what are the areas that your customers just aren't interacting with on your site that, that shouldn't even exist anymore? Often when we're implementing a platform, for instance, more than 30-40% of the platform features will never go used, right? There's a lot of like cruft that develops in platforms that have been around a decade, cough cough, Magento, and you see these legacy platforms. 99% of customers will never use a gift registry. It just won't, and it takes just as much effort to remove that from scope as it does to add other items to scope. So even like just creating a clean, easy to check out site that has very little bells and whistles today takes like more effort than what you might think. And so spending money sometimes is also spending money on removing things that are obstructions, not just adding things that are assistive. And these are all part of you helping you make your plan. I don't think we have that conversation enough. And those are the kinds of strategic conversations that I want to have. I don't want to just build. Sometimes I want to tear down too. And I don't think that we talk about that often enough, honestly.
You bring up, I mean, you that's a lot of matzo balls you unpack there, but like I think the one thing I can't in on is, as you as the partner, I mean, I think merchants look to you guys as for validation of some sort, right? It's how much should I be spending on dev? How much should I be spending on ads? What's a good ROAS? And I think like we can Google all we want. We could read white papers and case studies and whatever, and look for benchmark metrics. But it's all unique to the site, and it's what works for that unique business. So like I smiled because when you said like, hey, I forget how you put it, Phil, but my thought went to like, I know I often had the conversation with Something Digital Right Point was like, how do I stack up against other merchants in your portfolio in terms of how much we're spending on dev? Because I feel like we're not spending enough, but I don't know. Like I don't know, and it's harder to make that determination of like what's an incremental spend when it comes to dev versus like it's easier to dive into like, okay, I see my spend within this ad channel continues to do 8x as I raise spend incrementally. So I'm going to continue to raise spend. It's more difficult to say, okay, I'm going to decide to invest another $250,000 into my dev budget this year. So I think there's like or people are looking for validity or assurance from a good partner. But yeah, there's a lot to unpack what you said. I'll let everyone else take a hack at it.
Just for context, Ian used to be a client of mine. I do think that there's this other thing, which is sometimes the thing no one wants to hear, right? Which is, I mean, just look at the trend line. ROAS is going down. Conversion rate is kind of dwindling in a lot of cases. So there's more options than ever. People are being more deliberate in the way that they spend money. I like some of these metrics across all industries, especially in e-commerce, as the pie grows larger. It's not necessarily things that are going to be comforting to hear. And I think that sometimes it's giving the good advice sometimes like has to take a system integrator partner out of the equation. Also, system integrators, just integrators, pure integrators, are sort of a dying breed. Like the goal these days is you kind of have to have a plurality of services to have a holistic business that sort of touches a bunch of things. But Ingrid, it sounded like you were going to chime in there.
Yeah. I mean, there's again so much to unpack there, but Ian, you had just mentioned a few things that sort of stuck out to me. One of them is, or actually, Phillip, you said this about, your Amazon business is 3x, and so why is your D2C business suffering? Well, because they've channel shifted, and I think that poses some really challenging questions, not just for the leaders of D2C, but for brands and leadership in total. And that's the purpose of your D2C site. So if your entire purpose of having a D2C site is to drive sales, then everything that the company does needs to be in service of that, not just the person who's responsible for D2C. But I think that if we're taking a more modern view of a D2C business as well, especially for businesses that are not channel specific to D2C, like have distribution on Amazon or have distribution at brick and mortar or retailers, wholesale, our D2C sites are our brand meccas. They are our hubs for not just revenue, but also for the most deep brand experience that you can have. So that's where you house the loyalty program. That's where you house the community elements. That's where you have subscribe and save. That's where you have access to content and products that are exclusive and are a reason for existing on D2C. So if you're looking at it that way, I think that there are a ton more layers and metrics that you can use to measure success and things that you can invest in. But if you're only looking at it as a revenue driving channel, I think you're missing out. And I think that when you look at it just in that way and you only look at return on ad spend as your key metric, I think that you're setting yourself up for a pretty limited experience and revenue, frankly, on D2C. The way that we look at D2C, or the way that I have always advocated to anyone that I talk to in the space about looking at D2C, is through that experience. So measuring your customer acquisition cost and your lifetime value. And those two things combined are going to help you understand what your total business looks like, at least on D2C. Measure your loyalty program and the amount of people that are joining it, participating in it, and the percent of revenue that your loyalty program determines. And again, all of these metrics should correlate almost exactly to where they sit on your P&L and where they're sitting in your budget and your priorities. All that to say, I think that, just making sure that we're looking at things in a broader way, but then also narrowing it down to metrics that are very, very specific to those broad goals is the way that I've always found success in planning.
I need Alex, your reaction to that. But I'd love you to couch that. I took over. Sorry. I'd love you to couch that in. If in this contrived example that is in no way a real scenario at all, an Amazon business being up 3x and your direct to consumer channel has only grown 30 or 40% as opposed to the 100% projections over an 18-month period or something, if you're off plan but you're still up and to the right, have we all really failed? I'm curious what your take is on that.
So I think the answer to that question, it's a bit nuanced because it depends on your overall goals as a business, and I think the relative profitability of both of those channels. But I think what's so interesting, and that's come up in all three of these different experiences, is that e-commerce and D2C really is an ecosystem. And historically, it's something where we've approached it from like a very siloed point of view where, digital marketing understands campaign metrics and planning understands sell-through and finance understands free cash flow. And it's like, you all really do have to come together and understand how your decisions are impacting each other's ability to succeed. And the planning process is kind of like a microcosm of that. And the more effective you can make the planning process, the more you can make that all come together. The other thing I've heard from all three of you is that partner selection is really important. And I think I think that's a good advice in a lot of areas in life, but it's sometimes you kind of have to fight with the army you're given. So I'm wondering if there have been any, whether it's narratives or reports or different ways of framing things that any of you have found to be really effective in changing people's minds or like introducing a more holistic perspective to things.
I'll say one thing. Nobody wants to hear from their e-commerce integrator, their developer, that, moving your fiscal year off of calendar year is the biggest change to like giving a relief to your teams to planning. But I'll tell you, the companies that have the greatest growth and the strongest amount of planning and hit their goals more repeatedly are the ones who are not trying to plan for next year in the midst of Q4.
I love that.
And I'll stop right there. No one wants to hear that from me. And no one's going to take that
so
advice,
much.
but I'll shut up now. That's,
So much in my world makes sense now because our current company does not go on the calendar year for their fiscal year. Does anyone else have any magic bullets? If not, we can move on to our next topic. So there's a cliche that I love, which is when everything is an emergency, nothing is an emergency. And I think this situation that we're talking about right now is unfortunately the exception that proves the rule, where Q4 planning and executing and budget planning for your next year are both really important priorities. So would love to hear about how you think about balancing all of this and honestly about how you think about maintaining some semblance of a normal life in the midst of all of this as well.
What's a normal life?
I don't know. Having any time to think about things that are not work, I guess.
I know. That's an achievement. Well, so I think that what I have started to try to do at least is to plan for like 75% of things and then leave the 25% of things to actually be emergencies. And so it's this theme that I keep trying to reinstill with our teams, which is like less and better, right? And so if you're doing less, but you're doing everything better, which honestly just goes against a lot of what we have been doing for so long. It's just like more and more and more and more. And the more things you can throw at the wall, the more opportunities you have things to stick. And I completely understand the logic there, but it's just left everyone so stressed out, confused about what our priorities are. And then frankly, I don't think we're doing anything very, very well. And so I'm really trying to change our internal mindsets around making things better and doing fewer things, which also allow more time in our schedules and in our budgets to jump on new things. To, let's say there is this trend that we're seeing on TikTok and it really aligns with our plans, and we're not needing to like move mountains in order to do it or make everyone burn out and not have any time to spend with their families or to actually get some reprieve on the weekends. And I think that's been pretty helpful for us and for our teams. And I can definitely say that our teams, internal and partners, have really been grateful to have that, even though it's not fully been like in practice yet. We're looking at it for 2022. Just the idea that someone in a leadership position is looking at things through that lens has already restored a lot of cultural happiness.
I love fewer better things. I know that's become a big tagline in the marketing of products themselves, but I hope that more actual brands follow suit strategically.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, anyone who knows me knows I'm a pretty horrible planner. But one thing I was pretty decent at was planning for Q4 on the merchant side and being pretty ahead of that. So I think, and then in tandem with that, definitely taking a tact of like, once it's set for Q4, obviously things are going to occur, but I mean, we really weren't going. It was too important. Q4 was too important on the retail side to mess with anything too far into Q4. So it was like, all right, this is set. We're not making changes to the site. We're not making changes to the campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. Like this is basically saying it's going to take a true emergency, and just really kind of sticking to that standard and putting a stake in the ground. So the better you're able to plan for Q4 and get out ahead of it will allow you to kind of open up time to plan for the coming year. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that was a great point in terms of just fewer things. Yeah, I do think we overdo, hoping that if we, shotgun approach, but that typically doesn't work.
Yeah, there's and the balancing of priorities. To your point, Ian, we try to wind down the doing of new things and the signing of new business, midway through the year, so we can focus on executing on what the plan was, right? So in late Q2 and through Q3, like we're trying to wrap up work so that it's up and stable, and that we have a proven platform that can execute on through BFCM, an acronym that I reluctantly now use. And I think that there's a big challenge, especially around the human capital of commerce, is that it is 24/7, right? People go through huge emotional swings and ups and downs in the course of operating an e-commerce business. And when things aren't going well, despite you're having worked really hard, like that's really hard to swallow. And sometimes it's not your fault. Things just happen, right? And it used to be that infrastructure wouldn't keep up with demand, and that was a problem, right? Like that was something that we really couldn't forecast. You do your best, but in the cloud era now, it's much more, I think, emotional, back to like your intellectual capacity. It's one thing if the demand came in and the infrastructure failed, right? That's ones and zeros, and it's oh, I guess next year we should buy more hardware. It's another thing if your campaign was bad. Is that despite everything that you did, and all the email that you sent, and all the creative that you made, and all the money you spent for awareness, and all the media buy you did, that people just didn't want it, right? And that's really hard to swallow. And that's where it becomes extremely emotional. And it trickles down to all of your other partners, which is now we're scrambling because we don't necessarily just accept the fact that we're not going to make a plan. It's the priority now becomes we are making plan, right? And there's very, very infrequently a backup plan to the thing that we thought that was going to succeed. And not having a backup plan in engineering is unheard of. We have failovers, right? We have resiliency in hardware. I'm used to that. I am not used to having a backup plan when working with marketers and marketing teams and merchandisers, right? When you run out of stock and stuff's sitting at Long Beach and you don't have anything to sell, like what do we do? Nobody's thought about that. And so that's a new world for a lot of us that are old school, old timers in e-commerce, which is having to think like an engineer in the operations side of the marketing driver of e-commerce. And what are the secondary and tertiary things we want our customers to engage in that continue to drive some value for us and for the business, and what are the things that we fall back to when all else fails? And that's a thing that whether that's in a campaign, I don't know. So the balancing of priorities for me is being able to ask the question, like, well, what if this doesn't work? Like, what do we do? And how do we plan for the unexpected? How many of us have to be pulling all-nighters through BFCM because we now have to like get a extended sale up, and we have to try to bring in we're pulling out all the stops and doing whatever we can for now the waning weeks of 2021. None of us have ever been there, right? That's never happened to any of us. And that's how you go through burnout, and that's how you lose valuable people on your team, and it's how you burn partners. And I'd really prefer for us to have a sustainable e-commerce industry that you want to work in. But there's too many people that I've seen that have gone through this that are like, man, the 24-hour nature and the seasonality of e-commerce is like not conducive to my mental health. So, and they find themselves leaving the industry. And that's something that I forecast as being a big problem, is like a brain drain of very talented people who otherwise are, moving to B2B SaaS or something else, because this is a grind. And we could do better if we planned a little more, I think.
I think the solution to that, Phil, is a ticker you can put on your nightstand that updates every time you make a sale.
Wow.
Well, Phillip is coming in again with the amazing segue to our next and final topic, which something that you spoke to that really like jumped out at me is this idea, I think, in the retail world in general, where traffic is just coming from somewhere. Like, I think that's been the philosophy for a really long time, especially for people whose careers came to fruition in the era where malls were really successful and foot traffic was just always going up every year for some reason. But now we're in a different situation where traffic is like this variable that you're always having to have a plan A, B, and C for. And that has impacts on all different aspects of like the entire e-commerce planning process. So what do you guys do to address the specific nuances of planning for e-com? And if you've ever encountered that more of that like old-fashioned one-size-fits-all approach with partners or within your organization, how did you navigate that? Does anyone? That's a loaded question.
I think we only have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to let one of y'all hop on it.
I've definitely encountered the one size fits all. Mostly it just comes from people not understanding the fact that, frankly, D2C businesses are marketing channels. They are not. When a company approaches D2C in the way that it does a wholesale relationship with a retailer, I think that's where we're setting ourselves up for not having a successful experience, mostly because there are so many different elements that are required in marketing, in channel selection and investment, that yes, we do have more control over traffic than to a D2C site than we do to a brick and mortar store. But I think that because we have more, it gives us the false illusion that we have total control over traffic. And I think that people get drunk with this idea of that you can like, wow, you can plan your traffic. And so, of course, you can then plan your conversion rate, and then you can plan your AOV, and then you can just like mathematic your way into 100% growth year over year. And I'm just like, right. And so with all of these metrics, there's a ton of work and investment and focus that needs to come into play. And I think we end up just getting really, really focused on the metrics and the numbers and the math side of it, rather than doing the things that are eventually going to improve our AOV, improve our conversion rate, improve our traffic, which, spoiler alert, are kind of expensive and big things to do and becoming more and more and more expensive. And so as we start getting budgets, and I'm not saying this is my current experience, but I've definitely experienced this in the past, where you get, smaller budgets and bigger growth goals, it just is really, really missing the point. And I'm not saying it's also not sustainable to continue investing and getting the same. And you don't want to like spend to get, because that's another hamster wheel. But I think allowing us to like invest for a period and swallow the pill of, yeah, our customer acquisition cost is going to go up for the first quarter or the first 4 months of this particular year, but then that's going to set us up for the rest of the year to be able to harvest from that. And then we gain our efficiency and scale after that, is something that is kind of taboo to talk about with the financial people. And I think that it's even more complicated to do that in a publicly traded company where all you can do is deliver gains quarter after quarter after quarter.
Well, I think given that we have a limited amount of time left, I think that was a great answer to close out this part of the conversation. And we want to leave you all with some actionable advice that you can take away and hopefully implement, as soon as this week. So each of our panelists have put together a few key takeaways that will help you better prepare for your budgeting planning process in the future. I'll hand it back to Ingrid to talk through her takeaways, and then we'll go through, I think, Ian and Phillip.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we've talked about it pretty specifically. So broaden that conversation and broaden that, let people know where you're trying to go on this trip and what type of events and key moments you want to have on this trip. And then you'll be much happier with the way that the company packs you and gets you onto that plane. And then the second piece is just like, this is more internal PR and be able to demonstrate how your investments and priorities stack up against your growth goals. And so having a really, really clear conversation with your internal teams ahead of time and letting them know, okay, so this is the money that I have and these are the goals. Here's where that's going to stack up. And here's truly where I'm going to fall short or where I'm going to over index. And how do we get ahead of that story or that investment conversation before it's too late? Like, you don't want to wait until you're in Q3 or Q4 having that conversation, like having the hindsight or, the foresight ahead of time and being very deliberate and clear in your concerns is one of the only ways that we can push back or at least broaden the understanding of what our partners are doing.
Ooh.
This is me.
That's you.
So utilize, like I mentioned earlier, utilize your vendors rather to help you spend. Utilize your vendors to analyze your ROI, seasonality, etc. So really just like lean on them to say, okay, what did we spend last year? What was our ROAS on that? What did we see trending from the previous year, et cetera, and just allow your vendors, your partners to do that work for you, and really kind of come back with recommendations based on what they're seeing in the different channels. Because as Phil had mentioned, I mean, where we were with CPMs during COVID, early COVID through, where we are now has changed drastically. And hopefully you're working with vendors, especially on the digital spend side, who are up to date on what the trends are and can give you good recommendations on there. Work with your leadership within the company to try to obtain a priority stack of e-commerce features, software upgrades, et cetera, for the coming year, and really try to develop what those coming year's goals will be, set budget against it, and try to educate the leaders on the understanding that if something else comes up, unless there's no infinite amount of money and resources, obviously. So if something new arises in the coming year, then something's going to have to come off or be lowered on the priority stack. And then assess what over the previous year was incremental spend and what wasn't. So what $1 led to an additional $8 that if you had raised it to $2 would have led to 16. Figure out what you could have continued to dive deep into in terms of incremental gains that maybe you left on the table, and try to ramp that up in the coming year. Phil?
Okay. I have so much to say and not much time to say it. I think right sizing where you're spending money is always prudent. Obviously, spending more doesn't always equate to getting more. In many cases, the more you spend, it's actually the law of diminishing returns. You spend more and more and more on what you actually spend more on. This, Ian. You pump a lot of money into, let's say, custom dev. You're going to be reaping a lot of project management and QA costs, right? So you can't just shove an infinite amount of money at a problem. I think right sizing your spend and putting it into places where you can combine services is going to be the theme of 2022. And then so if I'll bang a little drum, if you're going to spend less on Facebook and Instagram, potentially, let's say you're shifting spend around, well, what do? Do you need to balance then? Do you have to have the complexity of trying to get 4 agency partners to all align and work together? Probably not. So as you're rebalancing your spend, maybe you're rebalancing agency partners and kind of finding more all-in-ones. I touched on this earlier, but probably not enough for it to be the top point here. And I think that having fewer hands to shake will result in better outcomes, because it goes with what Ingrid said about fewer better, but you'll have more people that are more aligned to a common goal and less having to coordinate and play the middleman between all of them. I think also, while I think a lot of the supply chain conversation is kind of overblown, that's my own personal belief, from seeing 40 clients continuing to sell and hit all their goals this year and having items in stock, but that's a whole other thing. I start to wonder that if there are brands that are struggling in inventory right now, what the heck they're even going to do, because if you don't have anything to sell and then you have nothing to say, I start questioning if you should even exist. Maybe your brand doesn't exist at all. It's just a really efficient algorithmic way of extracting value from one place in the economy to the next. And that's an existential crisis that I think we could all share and have all together. And I'd love to have that in person someday with all of you. The other thing is, if you're not having these open conversations with your partners, including the other departmental partners that you have, like finance, you need to start it now. And I think part of that is, I was able to foster a better relationship with finance, both within my company and with the finance teams on our clients' companies, by asking a bunch of questions that nobody had the answers to, and being persistent and not being satisfied with the I don't know, or the stay in your lane. I think sometimes the seeking of the why requires other people to have a seat, to come into the fold, to sit around the campfire together. And so for me, some of that conversation is going to be, hey, how are we going to make plan? And we can start dreaming up all these things, and your agency partners can say, well, you can implement pre-orders, and maybe you can sell digital gift cards. And these all sound like great ideas until finance hears about it and says, those are liabilities in a time of rapidly, increasing inflation. That sounds really scary. And so, these are all conversations that, you could be really informed about, but if we were all sitting together and having that conversation together, we could all come to some sort of mutual understanding that these are really complex times, and that goals are, arbitrary and sometimes, and the way that we adjust goals and the way that we meet goals is something that we should all share the responsibility around. And the more siloed they are, the more prone we are to fail. And so you got to open a conversation, not just with finance, but with all of your partners. And that's all I'll say about that.
And I think that's a great way to wrap things up. Again, thank you all for joining us. And for all of those watching, I hope you found the session to be valuable and you come away with something that you can implement to hopefully make 2022 a little bit more of a smooth ride than 2021. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.